Mantras of our Divine Mother. Our Divine Mother says the most important is a steady, quiet endurance that does not allow any upsetting or depression to interfere with your progress. The sincerity of the aspiration is the assurance of the victory. With always our love and blessings, says our Divine Mother. Sri Aurobindo Savitri, Book 2, Canto 7, The Descent into Night. A charm and sweetness, sudden and formidable, faces that raised alluring lips and eyes, approach him armed with beauty like a snare, but hid a fatal meaning in each line, and could in a moment dangerously change. But he alone discerned that screamed attack. Darshan Day Messages, November 17, 1974. Without him, I exist not. Without me, he is unmanifest, says our Divine Mother. Words of our Divine Mother, taken from the collective works of our Divine Mother, Question and Answers of 1956, page 1, date 4th Jan 1956. One child reads some lines taken from the collective works of our Lord Sri Aurobindo, the Synthesis of Yoga, volume 20, page 76, and reads, if we are to attempt an integral yoga, it will be as well to start with an idea of the divine that is itself integral. There should be an aspiration in the heart wide enough for a realization without any narrow limits. Not only should we avoid a sectarian religious outlook, but also all one-sided philosophical conceptions which try to shut up the ineffable in a restricting mental formula. Then the child turns to the Divine Mother and says, Sweet Mother, what does Sri Aurobindo mean by an integral idea of the divine? For this our Divine Mother smiles and says, everyone forms an idea of the divine for himself according to his personal taste, his possibilities of understanding, his mental preferences, and even his desires. People form the idea of the divine they want, the divine they wish to meet, and so naturally they limit their realization considerably. But if we can come to understand that the divine is all that we can conceive of, and infinitely more, we begin to progress towards integrality. Integrality is an extremely difficult thing for the human consciousness, which begins to be conscious only by limiting itself. But still, with a little effort, for those who know how to play with mental activities, it is possible to widen oneself sufficiently to approach something integral. Our Divine Mother says, you form an idea of the divine which suits your own nature and your own conception, don't you? So, if you want to get out of yourself a little and attempt to do a truly integral yoga, you must try to understand that the divine is not only what you think or feel him to be, but also what others think and feel him to be, and in addition, something that nobody can think and feel. So, if you understand this, you have taken the first step on the path of integrality. Instinctively, and without even being aware of it, people persist in wanting the divine to suit their own conceptions. For, without thinking, quite spontaneously, they tell you, oh, this is divine, this is not divine. What do they know about it? And then there are those who have not yet set foot on the path, who come here and see things or people and tell you this ashram has nothing to do with the divine. It is not at all divine. If you ask them what is divine, they would be hard put to the answer. They know nothing about it. And the less one knows, the more one judges. That's an absolute fact. The more one knows, the less can one pronounce judgments on things. And there comes a time when all one can do is observe, but to judge is impossible. One can see things, see them as they are, in their relations and in their place, with an awareness of the difference between the place they are now in and the one they ought to occupy. For this, the great discover or the disorder in the world, but one does not judge, one simply observes. And there is a moment when one should be unable to say this is divine and that is not divine, for a time comes when one sees the whole universe is so total and comprehensive a way that, to tell the truth, it is impossible to take away anything from it without disturbing everything. Our Divine Mother says, and one or two steps further yet, and one knows with certainty that what shocks us as a contradiction of the divine is quite simply something not in its proper place. Each thing must be exactly in its place, and besides, it must be supple enough, plastic enough to admit into a harmonious, progressive organization of all the new elements which are constantly added to the manifested universe. Our Divine Mother says, the universe is in a perpetual moment of inner reorganization, and at the same time it is growing larger. So to say, being more and more complex, being more and more complete, and getting more and more integral, and this indefinitely. And as gradually new elements manifest, the whole organization has to be remade on a new basis, so that there is not a second when everything is not in perpetual movement. But if the moment is in accordance with the divine order, it is harmonious, so perfectly harmonious that it is hardly perceptible. It is difficult to see it. Now, says our Divine Mother, if one comes down again from this consciousness to a more external consciousness, naturally one begins to feel very precisely the thing which help one to reach the true consciousness, and those which bar the way or pull one back or even struggle against the progress. And so the outlook changes. And one has to say, this is divine, or this helps me towards the divine, and that is against the divine. It is the enemy of the divine. But this is a pragmatic point of view for action, for moment in material life, because one has not yet reached the consciousness which goes beyond all that, because one has not attained that inner perfection, having which one has no longer to struggle, for one has gone beyond the zone of struggle, or the time of struggle, or the utility of the struggle. But before that, before attaining that state in one's consciousness and action, necessarily there is a struggle. And if there is a struggle, there is a choice. And for the choice, discernment is necessary. And the surest means to discernment is a conscious and willing surrender as completely as possible to the divine will and guidance. Then there is no risk of making a mistake or taking false lights for true ones, says our Divine Mother. Question, sweet mother, can the being who is chosen by the divine know it from his very birth? For this our Divine Mother says, even before his birth. Perhaps his birth is the result of this choice. Perhaps his birth is the result of this choice. Generally, it is like that, but at any time at all in his life, this can happen. Yet for those who are predestined, it is before birth. Usually they come to earth with an intention and a specific purpose. You would like to know very much if this has happened to you, yes? Well, try to find out. Have this inner aspiration, concentration, and then try. If you get a result, tell me, I shall tell you if it is right, says our Divine Mother. Then the child continues to say, sweet mother, to continue this question about the last sentence, the Supreme has laid his luminous hand upon a chosen human vessel of his miraculous light. For this our Divine Mother says, yes. Can this be applied generally, or is it for 1 in a million? For this our Divine Mother says, what do you mean by generally? Everyone on earth, is that what you mean? For this the child says, all those who aspire and do yoga, or is it only one person? For this our Divine Mother smiles and says, oh, now it begins to take shape. And then our Divine Mother laughs and says, is it one individual that the divine chooses to manifest him, or can he choose several? And then our Divine Mother again smiles and says, he chooses several. But here too, there is a hierarchy. One can understand nothing of the spiritual life if one does not understand the true hierarchy. Nowadays, it's not in fashion, it is something which human thought doesn't favor at all. But from the spiritual point of view, it is automatic, spontaneous, indisputable. And so, if the hierarchy is true, there is a place for everybody, for every individual in his own place. His individual truth is absolute. That is to say, each element each element which is truly in its place has a total and perfect relation with the divine in its place. And yet, on the whole, there is a hierarchy which too is quite absolute. But to understand the spiritual life, one must first understand that, and it isn't very easy. Everyone can be a perfect expression of the divine in himself, or on condition that he knows his place and keeps to it. And then the child says, and if they don't know the hierarchy, they cannot know this. For this, our Divine Mother says, but they don't need to know that they form a hierarchy. It is not necessary to know it. It is only if one wants to physically organize a spiritual society, then one has to materialize the hierarchy. But generally, in the world as it is, there are so many gaps in this hierarchy that it seems a confusion. The perfect hierarchy is a total hierarchy and it is not concerned with time and space. But when you want to realize this physically, it becomes very difficult. It's like weaving a piece of cloth with lots of holes everywhere, and the holes disturb the general harmony. Always people are missing, steps are missing, pieces are missing on the chessboard. All this is missing, so it's like a confusion. But if everything was expressed, everything in its in place, it will be a perfect harmony and a perfect hierarchy. There is somewhere, not in the material universe, but in the manifested universe, this perfect hierarchy. It exists, but is not yet manifested upon earth. Perhaps this will be one of the results of the supramental transformation. The world will be ready for a perfect, spontaneous, essentially true hierarchical manifestation, and without any kind of coercion, where everyone will become aware of his own perfection. The child says, sweet mother, what does a spiritual hierarchy mean? Because when we speak of hierarchy, that implies something graded in a superior and inferior order, doesn't it? For this, our Divine Mother says, yes, and that's quite wrong. That is to say, materially it is like that, but that is not what I call a hierarchy. Then the child says, then what is a hierarchy? Our Divine Mother says, it is the organization of the functions and the manifestation in action of the particular nature of each person. We have often tried to find comparisons, but they are worthless. For none of the things we know physically can answer to that condition. There is always the sense of superiority and inferiority, as you say. Some have compared a hierarchy to the various functions of the body, but that always gives the impression that the head is at the top, the feet is at the bottom, so that is a nuisance. Each element has a direct and perfect relation with the divine. All will become the divine, but not the totality of the divine, for the divine is everything. You cannot take a piece of the divine and say this is divine, and yet in the spiritual consciousness, each one has a perfect relation with the divine. That is to say, each one is the divine as perfectly as he can be. But to reconstruct the divine, all the divine is necessary. And it is precisely this that constitutes the very essence of hierarchy. But as each one is perfect in himself, there can be no feeling of inferiority or superiority. I don't think the human mentality can understand that. I think it must be lived. Once one has lived it, it is very simple. It appears luminously simple, but to understand it with the mind is not possible. It seems impossible, above all, because the mind, in order to understand anything at all, has to divide and contrast everything. Otherwise, it doesn't understand, it gets confused. But its very functioning, it becomes capable of understanding, says our Divine Mother.